千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So, to get back into 51, to finish our discussion there, I want to do a quick recap of what we talked about last time. You know, some time has passed between the last meeting and today, so I want to get everyone back into the swing of things on 51. We got most of the way through. We're going to continue our discussion. And if you recall, last time we talked about the chapter title. So this is something that I find isn't talked about a whole lot. Every chapter has a title, and sometimes they have multiple titles because there are variations. This particular one, chapter 51, had the title, The Respect and Value chapter. As we talked about last time, respect, once you have delved into the chapter to understand what it says, you know that the respect here is about how living things, including ourselves, all have a natural respect for the Tao. The value part is similar. It is saying that all living things, including ourselves, all naturally value the virtue by virtue of being alive. So whatever it is that is responsible for the life force in ourselves, for the life that we are living, for the life within us, we value that greatly. And this got us into a discussion of survival instincts, fighting to stay alive, survival of the fittest, etc. Now the chapter itself, again with the recap, what we did was that we broken down into two primary sections, two halves, the first half and the second half, divided right down the middle, 9 lines each. Then, with each half, as you saw, we were able to divide it further into basically 4 quarterly sections, so 2 subsections per half. And you can tell that just by looking at the repeating characters, the poetic structure in the original, it's relatively easy to identify the subsections. And we did that. What we were able to accomplish was to do a line-by-line explanation from line 1 all the way down to line 14. So this is where we are. And we're going to pick it up again to cover everything from line 15 to line 18 to wrap up our discussion. So what was the content? What was the meaning from line 1 to line 14? As you saw last time, what we can do is that we can summarize everything in the form of a graph. And you may recall that this is how the graph looks. As you can see, it centers around the myriad things. One, Wu, all the living things, including us. So for the myriad living things, all the living things in this world, what Lao Tzu says is that everything has a source. Later on, when we get into chapter 52, we're going to dig into that even further. For now, just think about the Tao as the source for all the living things. If it is the source, then it is that which produces, gives rise to the myriad living things. So what about the virtue? In this context, we're talking about the not as a human goodness like being compassionate, being kind, being generous, etc. We're talking about virtue as in by virtue of, in this case, by virtue of being alive. In other words, by the inherent power, the inherent characteristic of being alive. That characteristic is what allows one wu, the myriad things, to grow, to develop, to find a niche in the environment to survive and thrive. That includes all living things. It includes us. For us, it's not just, raw survival in an environment from a biological perspective. For us human beings, it is also survival in terms of the social context. We human beings are social creatures. We need one another. We work with one another, interact in a social setting. So the environment for us is not just the physical environment, but also the society in which we live, the social circles in which we operate, the workplace, family units, friends, and so on. Then at the bottom, we've got factors that influence the growth and development of all living things. To the left, we have things, additional things. And I'll just point out here really quick that the character for things, wu, is the same character as one wu. These characters are contextually driven, so by themselves, they are not singular or plural, depends on the context. In this context, both are used in a plural sense, things, plural, other entities. For living things, it's basically other living things in the same ecosphere. There's the competition for resources like food and water. There's the normal prey-predator relationship among animals. So the ecology is driven with those biological principles for the animal kingdom, for the wild, for nature. For us human beings, again, things are a little different. It's not just that human beings are the apex predators on this planet by virtue of the human mind that we have leveraged into tools and weapons that permit us to outfight, outwit much faster and much stronger animals who are much more capable than ourselves physically, but not mentally. The mind is literally the greatest weapon on this planet. So in addition to that, we're influenced by other human beings, other people. They play a role in our lives, whether as a friend or foe, or perhaps frenemy in some cases. We interact with them. They influence us in various ways. And lastly, we also talked about environmental factors. So this would not be other entities at all, but factors that influence everyone. So for a natural setting out in nature for the animals and plants, environmental factors would be things like the weather, the temperature, and so on. For us human beings, there's more. We are subjected to the weather as well. We certainly are sensitive to temperature. We don't like it too hot or too cold. Then there's a whole bunch of additional factors that, for instance, animals don't have to take into account. Things that have to do with the economy, things that have to do with the advancement of human knowledge. So we are influenced by, for instance, interest rates, because monetary transactions is a mainstay, a staple of our civilization. And then we are also influenced by technological changes. Changes especially have been swift and rather unforgiving in the past few decades, and it seems to be accelerating, getting faster all the time. So these definitely influence us. The name of the game then, whereas on the left-hand side, when we talk about the other entities, it's all about competition, cooperation. On the right-hand side with the forces, it's about adaptation. It's about adjusting to change. And in some cases, taking advantage of change, capitalizing on change, leveraging change. So no matter what you're talking about, whether it's out in nature or in the human world, these are the factors that predominate. Then, let me point out one thing. Every arrow that you see here is natural. It's natural that there's an origin or a source for life. And that's the arrow from the Tao to the myriad things. It's natural for by virtue of being alive, it's natural for that to give rise to growth and development, of course. It's natural for things, entities to influence one another. We see that all the time. It is also natural for the various environmental forces to exert an influence on the myriad things, including human beings. These are all natural. Now, as I talk about those arrows, I haven't yet pointed to the two curving arrows that you see that go back from Wan Wu to the Tao and De, respectively. So what Lao Tzu says is that Wan Wu, the myriad things, respect the source of life. That's Tao. And this is perfectly natural that all living things manifest a form of respect for the source of life, for the procreation, reproduction aspect of life. Hence, parents have parental instincts to care for the young. And then on the other side, on the right-hand side, the other curving arrow, back to De, we all value that which is responsible for growth and development. That is, we value the fact that by virtue of being alive, we get to learn and grow. So that's the arrow pointing back. We value and again, this is also completely natural. Nobody had to tell us that we need to do this, that we had to value our own lives, that we have to fight for our own lives. In some cases, it's natural for all living things to hold the regard, the respect, and hold life in great value. That's just the way things are. So that's the graph that we followed last time. And when I talk about this idea that it's natural in the Tao, there's a very specific way to look at what is natural. And we talked about that last time as well. And I want to bring in those characters once again to remind everyone that 自然, the two characters describe the nature out there, the greater nature, that which is natural, things that are done naturally. And what happened is that we saw this first in this chapter, in chapter 51, about constant nature. And then I also want to point out that the meaning of nature and being natural and do things naturally is to be in accordance with the self. The two characters that you see in 自然, we talked about last time that 自 means self. Self could be yourself, myself, themselves, itself. Then the second character, 然, is an affirmative. Affirmative meaning yes, affirmative meaning in accordance with, in agreement to. Therefore, when you are in the state of 自然, when you are being natural, you are being true to yourself. So that is an important point that we talked about last time. Being natural in that sense is what allows you to relax and be truly comfortable. It is what allows you to bring out your best effortlessly. So I wanted to reiterate that in this recap because of the importance. And then as we get closer to the point where we left off, last time we spoke of the similarities between the first half and second half. So as you saw for yourself, the beginning of the first half, the first two lines, are repeated almost exactly the same in line 10 and line 11. It's actually a little easier to see that when you look at the original Chinese characters. Sometimes the same Chinese characters are translated differently, so you can't always look at the English translation to realize that the two halves start exactly the same. So then below the first two lines of each half, we talk about the implications of those two lines. And the two lines specifically talk about that graph that we just looked at, where the Tao is producing, giving birth to, giving rise to living things. And then virtue is what is responsible for raising them, nurturing them, basically growth and development, as I mentioned. So then below that, we have lines that go into details. We covered everything from 3 to 9, and then last time we were able to cover 12, 13, and 14. So let me revisit that quickly to talk about how by 德, virtue being alive, we grow, we learn. Therefore, the environment is the teacher, and the meaning is the same for us human beings. It's just like when we say, hey, live and learn. Of course, we're human beings. We have the human mind, human consciousness, so we always take it to the next level. And then for us, unlike for the animal kingdom, the challenge is mental, not just physical. And then real quickly also, we talked about last time that this whole idea of the material world perfecting myriad things complete their development, and this is all about maturing. And then it's all about growing up. Of course, in the animal kingdom, it's all about being physical. For human beings, it's got to be about mental as well. It's got to be about emotional maturity, mental maturity, as we talked about last time. Then I also mentioned previously that this is one place where we have variation in the original text of the Tao Te Ching. I have chosen the older version, 和尚公, which is from a little more than 2,000 years ago, fairly close to the time of Lao Tzu. The characters, as you can see, those are the ones that I have used. Now, the other version is from Wang Bi. He was a scholar who consolidated all the different versions of the Tao Te Ching couple hundred years, couple centuries after the time of He Shangong. So by that time, it's about 7 centuries from the time of Lao Tzu. What I also explained was that even though the characters are different, their essential meaning is the same. And the meaning used by Wang Bi from 1800 years ago, those characters have morphed, they have changed and evolved. So in modern Mandarin, they are no longer seen in the same way as the other variation, but they mean the same thing. This is potentially something that can catch a modern Mandarin speaker by surprise if they don't know about the language evolution through the ages, through the different dynasties. They would only recognize these characters in a different context, pavilion, poison, which seem to have nothing to do with completion and maturing. But if you recall from our discussion previously, in ancient times, they actually meant the same thing. A little bit of that we can still see in modern language, but you will have to dig very deeply into modern Mandarin, modern Chinese, in order to be able to see the connection. So moving on. So this is where we left off last time. This is where we're gonna pick it up and continue with our discussion for today. We got to line 14, which is about nurturing the myriad things, protecting the myriad things. And my remark from last time was that nature provides this sheltering environment, not just to the animals and plants, but also to us. And there are things that we take for granted. And with our understanding of science, that list only grows. So I talked about gravity, I talked about the atmosphere protecting us from the vacuum of space, shielding us from radiation, etc. The reason why I bring that up is because these are the things, these are the ideas not available to the ancients. But the more we learn about the natural world through the tool of science, the more we see that they were actually more correct than they thought. And the same thing is the same pattern is going to show up more and more when we talk about other passages of the Tao Te Ching. The ancient sages, using intuition, oftentimes prove to be more correct than we initially thought. So that sets us up for putting us at line 14, getting us into line 15. One thing that I want to mention before we move on is that when we talk about, nurturing living things, protecting them, perfecting them, etc., there are two things to keep in mind. One is that this is actually what we're looking at here is actually a reference, a preview of the next chapter, 52, which we're going to talk about in great detail. It's going to talk about the Tao as the nurturing mother, so a lot more to discuss there. And it will also talk about that which is given rise by the source or the mother, which is the children, and that again is us. Another thing to keep in mind, the second thing to keep in mind is that the yin and yang symbol tells us that the Tao has the complementary sides, and they're actually two sides of the same coin. So when we talk about the life-affirming aspects, there's also the death aspect of it. Nature has a great number of ways to kill as well as to give life, to give death and also give life. It is because human beings leverage this all-powerful human consciousness that we have managed to mitigate a lot of the death-giving aspects of nature to keep us safe, to develop human civilization, human population, and so on. That doesn't mean that nature loses the death aspect of it. Indeed, the death is linked back to life in uh, an eternal circle. And the example that we used previously was that the dead bodies of animals become nutrients for plants, and plants themselves, give nutrients, give food in order to allow animals to continue living, and it just goes on. That's the way the world works. So having settled that, let's start getting into the last section of 51. Okay, let's talk about line 15. Produces but does not possess. This is a reference to the Tao itself, that the Tao produces all things, but it does not try to be possessive of them. Now, when you apply that to our level, to the human level, we can see that oftentimes when people create something, give rise to something, we may feel possessive of it. We may want to exert some kind of control over it. When we compare and contrast that with the Tao, we see that the Tao is completely different. The Tao is non-human and therefore has no emotions. It has no feelings of being possessive or any other feelings. So the Tao creates everything, but does not feel possessive of anything, because indeed it does not feel anything at all. It is not a human-like deity. If we were to emulate this characteristic of the Tao, that means letting go. That when you have created something, it becomes a gift from your special talents to the world, something to share. So this is when you get to this point in your cultivation of the Tao, as I have, you begin to see the importance of sharing what you create with everyone. I know that in our group, there are many creative individuals, and I think all creative types feel that same essence, that what you have created, if it is something that is good and positive and contribute to people's lives, you want to share it as much as you can. You want to liberate it, let it go into the world, be seen and enjoyed by as many people as possible. So what we're doing now, my books, the talks every Sunday, this is my level best to emulate the Tao. And let's get into it even a little bit more. A Tao cultivator can be creative without excessive attachment to the creation or the desire to control. Of course, when we talk about this, we're not talking about flying in the face of the laws of the land when it comes to copyrights. Those, because we function in this society, those laws, regulations, we still have to observe and live by. Beyond that, though, if we are able to truly be unattached, then it would be the first of the three characteristics describing what we call mystic virtue. To have mystic virtue, this is the first requirement, that you are creating something and yet you are not trying to control or interfere. So let me talk about these characters in greater detail. In many cases, when translating the Tao Te Ching, there are characters that can be translated in only one way or just a few ways. There are characters that can be translated in similar ways of related meaning, but there's freedom. There's freedom for the translator to pick and choose the best word as long as you stick with the original meaning, that you not stray too far away from that. In this case, I'm going to focus on the first character there. It means produce, to create, give birth to bear. And bear, I don't mean bearing a burden, I mean like bearing children, to raise them up, to help them grow, basically, to nurture them. So these are all folded into the first character there in line 15. And then we have the two characters. You'll see the character here, bu, which is the second from last character in the line. You'll see that again and again. It's very common. It just means negation. It means not. And when you combine it with the last character, which means possess or to have something, to have or possess something, not possess, not have specifically means to not be possessive, to not have possession. And then what you can do, if you were translating this particular line, you can mix and match the possible translations to create your own. So for instance, you can say, the Tao gives rise to the myriad things, and yet it is not possessive of them. There you go. You have created a completely accurate translation. It captures the meaning of the original. You can also change it around a little bit, sticking to the same meaning. The Tao produces all living things, but it does not claim possession. That's also fine. It is also 100% consistent with the original meaning that Laozi was trying to express. And the last thing that I'm going to say to everyone here is that it is always a good idea to express the Tao in your own words. So my invitation to you right now, as you're listening to these words, is to look at the range of possible translations. And you can probably come up with more synonymous expressions, different words that mean the same thing. So you might look at this and you might say, well, it appeals to me to be able to say that the Tao gives birth to all living things, and yet it is not possessive of any living thing, or something like that. Always a good idea to say it in your own words. I want to encourage that in everyone as an exercise. And you can do the same thing with not just this line 15, but also 16 and 17. So let's take a look at the next one and see the range of possibilities. So here, the translation that you see is acts but does not flaunt. So let's take a look. First of all, let's recognize that when people do something, they may want to show off. We see that all the time. So this is almost, this is so common that we can even say that the tendency to do that is almost like part of human nature. Fortunately, we also see the other example that there are many people out there who will accomplish, will achieve, will do things, but they prefer to just stay quiet. If other people discover what they have done, that's totally fine, but they won't try to grab the spotlight to show off. So not human nature for everyone, but there's definitely enough people out there who want to flaunt, who want to show off. We do know that the Tao does everything. It's whatever it is, driving the accomplishment of absolutely everything in existence. Whatever that is, that's the Tao. So the Tao does everything in that context, and yet, because the Tao is not human, nor is it a human-like entity, like a deity, it doesn't flaunt at all. It is not capable of flaunting. You would not imagine a case where gravity causes something to fall to the ground and then say, hey, look, everybody, I just caused that thing to fall. Gravity can't do that. Neither can the Tao. So emulating the Tao in this case means letting your work speak for itself. You've done something, that's great. So for the Tao cultivator, we take actions to make progress on things that are meaningful. Here, I want to just make sure everyone understands. I don't say this often enough. We have new people coming into the meeting all the time. I want to make sure everyone hears me say this. The real lessons of the Tao, as it was taught by the ancients, is not necessarily going with the flow. Okay? Going with the flow is a more passive mindset. The original Tao, as expressed by the ancient sages, is oftentimes much more dynamic, much more a living essence, much more, here's life. Reach out and grab what you need to. Do what you must do. Take on a mission. Go on a quest. So a lot of it in ancient times is much, much more action-oriented, that is balanced with rest, recuperation, and planning, not just going with the flow. That's only a part of it. So here, back to this emphasis, Tao cultivators take action to make progress on meaningful tasks, but not to draw attention. So that's important. This is emulating the Tao. The Tao does everything, but the Tao doesn't show off. So then one more point before we take a mid-meeting break. Whether people notice or fail to notice is not a significant concern. There's a little bit more that I've built in to that sentence there. The sentence itself is simple, and most people can agree, yeah, people may or may not notice. It's not important. The important thing is getting the job done, doing what you set out to do, and attaining a positive result, something like that. Here, though, what I want to emphasize is that because how much or how little people notice is not a significant concern, it doesn't matter to a Tao cultivator what others do as far as paying attention. It means that the Tao cultivator will not parade around. Hey, everybody, look at what I have done. By the same token, a Tao cultivator would also not sneak around. Hey, everybody, look away. Don't pay attention to what I'm doing, and do something, in the back, out of sight, out of everyone's attention range, and then sneak away. That's not the Tao. The Tao cultivator doesn't take special actions to show off or to hide. That's the main point. Simply takes actions, period. The most effective actions. Those actions may go unnoticed. That's totally fine. Those actions may be noticed by people. That's fine too. It doesn't matter. It's not a primary consideration. So the entire focus is on the process of doing something right, not on other people. That's the point here. So let's talk about line 16. As you can see here, line 16, the translation again is acts but does not flaunt. As we talked about in the previous slide, it's about the difference between human behavior and the behavior or the characteristic or the essence of the Tao. And let me quickly go through where we were at. Okay, so here we are. Let's continue. So a little more discussion here, and now we can do what we did with line 15 to look at the different ways to translate this particular line, starting with the first character. You can see in my translation that this character I've translated as act, but you can also look at the range of possible translations: to do, to act, to achieve, to accomplish. Okay. All of those would capture the original meaning. Then take a look at the last two characters. 不是 means, again, 不 means not. It's a negation. And then the last character there, 是, it means to flaunt or to show off, to be arrogant, to be presumptuous. To put a not in front of it means, of course, to not flaunt, not show off, not be arrogant, not be presumptuous. So if you mix and match the way that you would prefer to express the original thought by Laozi in English, you could come up with something like, the Tao does everything, but it does not show off its achievements. This will be a different translation than what I have presented here in line 16, and yet it will be quite accurate. Now, if you want to know why I picked specifically acts but does not flaunt, it is because I noted that the original was quite short. So for the right flavor in English, I wanted to create a relatively short translation as well. Thus, from the range of possibilities, I decided something like acts but does not flaunt still expresses everything, but doesn't do it with a lot of words. If you prefer more words, though, that's totally fine. Yet another possibility, the Tao accomplishes all without any arrogance. There again, you are expressing everything accurately. So remember, I want to encourage you to look at the range of possibilities and create something that appeals to you, something that you prefer. Let's do the same thing with line 17, first by thinking about how this applies to the world. So previously, we talked about the difference between what human beings do and what the Tao is observed, the way that it behaves, what its characteristics are. Now, with this line, the translation for this line says, nurtures but does not dominate. For the real world, rather than to compare human beings with the Tao, I want to ask everyone to consider a river. It doesn't have to be any particular river. It can be any river that winds its way around the land. As it goes across the land, the water of the river nurtures all living things that it comes across. So in this case, it may be the plants around the river, the animals that come to the river to slake their thirst, and so on. Now, the important thing in the context of line 17 is that once the river has done this nurturing, slaking the thirst for animals, providing nutrients for plants, etc., the water of the river moves on without a word. So this is one of the reasons why water is so often used as a metaphor for the Tao, because like the Tao, water doesn't stick around to dominate the living things. Water doesn't demand obedience or worship from the living things that it has nurtured. So the Tao is just like that. It provides everything to all living things, but it moves on without a word. The Tao, not being a deity, does not seek fellowship with human beings, does not demand obedience, requires no worship. Now, let's take a look at the range of possible meaning for the different characters, just like we did before for the previous two lines. And that way, you can come up with your own. So the first character there, 长, it means to raise, to nurture, to help grow. Then, let's take a look at the last two characters. Again, it's a negation. Here, it means not trying to dominate, not be domineering. So then you can create your own translation that may look like the Tao nurtures the myriad things without the need to dominate. You will be totally accurate had you chosen that particular way to express the original four characters in ancient Chinese. You may say the Tao is nurturing to all and it does not dominate anyone. That would also be accurate. These are just examples, and I hope you see what I'm trying to do here. By using these examples, what I would like to do is encourage you to make your own. Do it yourself. This is the sort of the DIY 道德经. And lastly, the very last thing to keep in mind, and I probably everybody already gets the idea, I just want to reiterate it for emphasis. Keep in mind that these lines apply to you, not just the Tao. Even though 15, 16, 17 are talking about what the Tao does and what it does not do. It produces but does not possess. It acts but does not flaunt. It nurtures but does not dominate. Even though it's referring to the Tao, because the Tao is within you, because what you cultivate is the Tao, the idea is that you want to try to emulate the Tao by doing the same thing, by producing, creating, nurturing others without possessing, without flaunting, without trying to dominate anyone. These are actually principles to live by. So let's tackle, I think with these three factors in mind, we're now ready to tackle the very last line and the major concept of 51. Last line, as you can see in this slide, this is called mystic virtue. Let's zoom in on mystic virtue. So first, let's talk about the pinyin. The pinyin looks a little strange to native English speakers. It actually sounds like 玄德. And so when you hear me say 玄德, it probably doesn't sound a whole lot like what the English spelling suggests, but that's how it's supposed to sound. If you study the pinyin system, you quickly realize that these letters together is supposed to sound like 玄德. So the two characters, the first one, literally the first character means mystic, mystical, mysterious. And the second character is the same 德, the virtue character, like 道德经, the middle character from the title, 道德经. So putting it together, we definitely translate it as mystic virtue. And what is the meaning? Well, 玄, mystical, mysterious, difficult to comprehend. Now, let me give you a note on ancient Chinese here. 玄 in ancient times was a character that was used to say dark or the black color, like dark clothing. The reason why is because of a tangential meaning of the character 玄. It is supposed to be mystical, mysterious, and difficult to comprehend. Tangentially, it means things that are difficult to see, like in darkness, things that are shrouded in darkness. So that particular meaning gets extracted to mean dark color, because in the dark, it's hard to see anything. And we oftentimes would say, I don't see it, means I can't comprehend it. I don't quite get it, right? So mistranslation, because of that, ancient origin, that ancient tangential meaning of this character, 玄, translators who don't really know all of that about linguistic changes and connections will look at 玄德 and say dark virtue. Okay, well, that, guys, that has a completely different feeling, a different connotation. I can guarantee to everyone right now, 玄德 is not dark virtue. There is no such thing as dark virtue in the Tao. Okay, it's about the mystical, the difficult to understand. Now, even without going any further, when you look at the previous 3 lines, you can actually get a feel for what Lao Tzu was trying to get at. What Lao Tzu was trying to say is that if you look at the human world, so often everybody, when they do things, when they create things, when they nurture things, that's usually followed by attempts to flaunt, to be possessive, to dominate. The Tao is different in that it doesn't do any of that, and yet it does more than anybody. So that is the part that is quote unquote difficult to understand because that is not what most people do. That's not what a lot of people do. That's why it's the mystic virtue. So let's keep going. 德 means virtue, a goodness that benefits us. So this together, 玄德, it's actually just saying that the Tao is actually the ultimate virtue. And throughout the entire Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu is very consistent in pointing to the Tao as the ultimate virtue and pointing to virtue as one step away from the ultimate realm of the Tao. So to say that the Tao is the ultimate virtue, that is mystical, mysterious, and difficult to comprehend, now you can see exactly what that means. It just says, we can appreciate it. We appreciate everything that the Tao accomplishes for us. But that doesn't mean we fully understand it. In fact, we know that we do not fully understand the Tao. Therefore, the Tao as the ultimate virtue is also the mystical virtue. When you look at it that way, it really does make perfect sense. When you understand the original with crystal clarity, everything falls into place. So let's take a look at 玄德. 玄德, the concept, has shown up multiple times in the Tao Te Ching. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of chapters, including this one. And I want to point out to you the similarity between the two. They are not just similar, they are identical. So the first appearance is in Tao Te Ching chapter 10. And then the second appearance, this chapter, is Tao Te Ching 51. So now, in the blank space that you notice in this slide, that's where I will have them appear, starting with chapter 10. So look at line 14, 15, 16, and 17. This is at the very end, and it ends on those 2 characters, 玄德, mystic virtue. Now, what about this chapter that we're currently studying? We're at the very end. So lines 15, 16, 17, 18. 18 is the last line. It ends on exactly the same 2 characters, 玄德. Now, compare the other characters leading up to it. They are exactly the same, as you can see. If they are exactly the same, then how come the translation is a little bit different? Well, that's exactly like the exercise that we have gone through, that you want to use a range of possible translations that all mean the same thing. You can mix and match, but you want to express the original accurately. Now, I think you can see bearing without possession is actually the same as produces but does not possess. achieving without arrogance, acts but does not flaunt. Raising without domination, nurtures but does not dominate. And then the last line, translated the same way, this is called the mystic virtue. Okay, so again, I want to encourage everyone to look at these texts as a guideline. Everyone has been following these talks for some time. I think you are ready, oftentimes, to create your own paraphrase, your own translation of some of the key passages. I think it'll be very beneficial. It'll further your understanding of the original. With that, we have completed the line-by-line discussion of the entire chapter, chapter 51. We're now ready to do the paraphrase. With the paraphrase, as ever, our purpose is to demonstrate understanding by using the thought of Lao Tzu and expressing that thought accurately with modern language. So not a translation, a paraphrase. We start out with the iconic 4 lines about the Tao, virtue, things, and forces in the environment. So to paraphrase this, I think you would agree, is especially important to understand this chapter accurately. Here is what I would like to offer. The Tao, as the ultimate source, produces the myriad things of the world. The myriad things grow by virtue of the life force within them, and as they grow, they are shaped by the environment and other living things around them. All of this happens in a complex web of interdependent connections. So with the paraphrase, I can switch around the forces in the environment and the living things. So it's a little different than the original order, but that's okay. We're expressing the meaning. And as a paragraph, this right here should make sense to everyone. That's the whole concept that we want for the paraphrase, is that when we say it like this, people should not require some sort of advanced degree into ancient Chinese. They just need to know modern English, and they can grasp the original immediately. Let's go to section 2. This is about the natural respect and value that living things have for the Tao and virtue. So here's what I would like to offer. The myriad things cannot help but respect the source of life and value their own lives. This is not something that has to be taught. Living things already know they must fight to stay alive or run away to fight another day. No one ordered them to be this way. They act like this because it is natural for them to do so. So this is sort of the modern expression of this ancient idea of respecting the Tao, valuing the virtue. So let's take a look at another section. Again, we want to be very careful to stick to the original meaning. You guys know that as you look at the various books on the Tao Te Ching out there, that there's a tendency in the West to say that, hey, you can explain them however you want. And what I would say is actually the opposite. What I would say is that you can express in your own words, but you have to stick with the original in terms of meaning, or you lose the essence of Lao Tzu. So the direction is important. It's not a blank check to do whatever anyone wants. That's important. So let's talk about the next section. It's all about an elaboration on this idea that after Tao produces all living things, virtue raises them, and then they grow and develop in different ways. They mature and are completed in different ways. Let's see if we can express that same idea accurately in English. The Tao doesn't just create a myriad of things and let them develop on their own. It also provides the environment where they can learn and mature. The situation is the same for humans. The Tao doesn't just give us a setting in which to grow, it also gives us challenges so we can learn from life and thereby better ourselves. Here, what I am attempting to do is to link these concepts from the realm of the Tao to everyday living. So if you think about it, we all come from someplace, and we're going to put a label on it that says Tao. We all grew up and learned through life by virtue of being alive. We got to do that. So that's the virtue part. We all have to learn to live with one another. Think about the world the way it is today. More important than ever, we have to learn to live with one another in peace and harmony. Not always easy, but it's necessary. We all learn to adapt to changes, to change our approach, to have flexibility to be able to meet the challenge of yet another year. So especially suitable for us as we discuss this at the beginning of the year, but suitable really at any time. So then let's conclude the paraphrase by looking at the last section there. This is all about 玄德, all about the mystic virtue. It's about what the Tao does. It's about what we should do to emulate the Tao. So I would like to offer the following. The important thing is that even though the Tao is the source of our creation, it is not possessive of us. Even though it makes everything happen, it does not flaunt its achievements. Even though it provides us with everything we need, it makes no demands. We call this the mystic virtue of the Tao. So here we're sticking fairly close to the original, and my comment is the same as what I have expressed, and that is, let's not forget, we also want to cultivate mystic virtue in ourselves by emulating the essence of the Tao. So this concludes our paraphrase of chapter 51. Now, the only thing left to do is to do the full circle discussion. The full circle discussion will complete everything we want to express, we want to talk about and discuss with chapter 51. It looks like we have just enough time to do that. So let's go ahead and get into the full circle. How do we connect the end of this chapter back to its beginning to really get the essence of the Tao? So this is what advanced students of the Tao Te Ching have discovered. Every generation throughout Chinese history, every dynasty, when people discover the Tao Te Ching and study it, they can do so in a superficial way, or they can dig into it deeply. If they dig deeply enough, sooner or later, they discover one thing, that you can link the end of a chapter back into the beginning for a full circle. This oftentimes brings extra insights, deeper insights into the meaning of what Lao Tzu was trying to express. In fact, the same is true the other way. If you can't make any sense out of the end of a Tao Te Ching chapter to its beginning, it just means that you haven't understood the chapter completely. With that in mind, let's get into 51 to see what it says, to see how we can form the full circle. So our full circle discussion always starts the same way in the last lines of this chapter. And what is the last line? 是谓玄德. The last line is talking about, that which is called the mystic virtue. And remember, it doesn't mean dark virtue. It's mystic virtue. So what is mystic virtue? Let us see if we can gain some insights into that. In the last lines of Tao Te Ching 51, Lao Tzu talks about the mystic virtue, the virtue of the Tao in achieving everything without trying to take credit for anything. Now, by the way, in real life, when you emulate the Tao in that regard, that you do whatever you can, but you don't try to take credit, what you quickly learn is that the process has a sort of a magic embedded into it, in that people notice anyway. You don't try to attract their attention, but they pay attention on their own. So even though you don't try to take credit, you actually end up with credit, and it's all the more powerful because it's other people who single you out for recognition. It is so much better when someone else says that you have done something great, rather than for you to pat yourself on the back and say, hey, everybody, look what I have done. I find that the greatest leaders intuitively understand this Tao. That is, when something great has happened, when something has been accomplished, they said that, I gotta tell you, full credit goes to the team. I have a fantastic, wonderful team that worked together that produced this great results. When a great leader does that, what always happens is people look to the leader and say that, no, it was actually him or her that brought everybody together to produce such great results. So there's some powerful capabilities that one can manifest when you listen to the Tao and cultivate mystic virtue. All right. When we link this back to the beginning, we see a nice reminder about what the Tao actually achieves. So let's link back. Go back to the very first line. The very first line, Dao Shen Zhi, means the Tao produces them, as in the myriad things. When you apply that to human life, to the level of you and me, what it says is that the manifestation of the Tao within you, that's your creativity, that's your creative energy, produce all your creative works, all your ideas, all your creative expressions. That's from the Tao within you. Let's continue on. So the Tao is the name we give to the ultimate source, the beginning of universal creation. At the human level, it's the engine of creativity within. When you understand the Tao, when you cultivate to a certain point, this is especially beneficial to the creative types, like writers, for instance. When you get to this particular point, you come to a place where you realize that writer's block is a thing of the past. You are free of it. You will never be stopped by the writer's block. That's definitely what I have found. Remember, 15, 20 years ago, I would struggle sometimes to put words on paper or, in word processor. When I got to a certain point in Tao cultivation, suddenly writer's block evaporates And that's because I identify with the engine of creativity within me that has a connection to the Tao. You do as well. It's the same for everybody. If you don't think of yourself as a creative person, you just have to cultivate the Tao to a certain point, then you begin to realize that you have unlimited creativity. You really begin to see just how creative you can be. Let's continue. Now, when we talk about universal creation, it goes by different names, different labels. In science, we may call it the Big Bang Theory. And there's, following the Big Bang, there's also the inflation. Not the economic inflation, universal inflation, inflationary expansion. In religion, we may call it Genesis. These are different labels for the same idea. And let's continue. Whatever the terminology, remember, these are just different labels. It connects through everything in existence back to the mystic virtue. And this is where we would full circle our way back to the end to connect everything together. So this is the insight. 玄德 is inextricably linked to human creativity at the personal scale, universal creation at the macrocosmic scale. Hence, I want to single it out, 玄德, the mystic virtue here. And I want to present this slide to highlight the two characters. I know that there's going to be people who may want to keep these two characters handy as a reminder of the wonders of the Tao and Tao cultivation. If so, there you go. And now I am ready to jump to the summary for today. Applying the Tao Te Ching. So then let's talk about what we went over today. 玄德. So to the right of the slide, you'll see 玄德, the two characters, and then you'll see the three characteristics of 玄德. And the most important thing for me is to ask everyone to think about how this applies to your own life. First, create without the need to possess. And you recognize this as the first line, the first characteristic. And here, I'm putting in a couple of sub-bullets to act as sort of a reminder for everyone that when it comes to creativity, remember, what is truly yours can never be taken away. So don't be gun shy, don't be afraid about sharing what you have created. It's going to bear a unique stamp that says you. And it is something that I want to encourage you to share with everyone. Your creation is a gift. Tap into the unlimited source. This goes back to what I was just talking about, that when you are able to connect with universal creativity, you have all of that in infinite, unlimited flow to express as you see fit. That's when you truly feel blessed as a human being to be a vessel of this vast creative energy that you can aim at whatever you please. So I would encourage all of you to continue on with your study of the Tao. If you haven't already gone to this point or glimpsed this vast power, you will get there soon. Number 2, take actions without the need to flaunt. So this is a practice in the Tao of humility. It's not the Tao of self-degradation or debasement. It's not the Tao of sneaking around hoping nobody will see what you're doing. No, it just means you do whatever you have to do without trying to draw attention. And a couple of reminders, of course, I think everyone is aware, flaunting is driven by this egocentric desperation. When we see it in other people, I think most of us will find that very unattractive. So let's watch and cultivate the Tao of humility in ourselves so that whatever egocentric desperation may exist within us will simply vanish. Let recognition happen naturally, and they will. Don't be afraid about not getting the recognition you deserve. You will get every last bit of it if you follow the Tao. Lastly, nurture without the need to dominate. So this is about mentoring other people, providing assistance, support, also encouragement, and letting go at the same time of the need to control or interfere or meddle is the way that I'm phrasing it here. Same idea. Let people be free. Liberate them just as you are liberated. And that, at the end of the day, is how we follow the Tao. This brings a complete end to our discussion of this chapter today. I'm very happy to have had this time to spend with everyone to do it justice. Now, our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.